The classroom had never been this quiet before. Not during exams, not during fire drills, not even on the day the principal collapsed during morning announcements. But now, 32 students sat frozen in their seats, staring at a boy who had barely spoken a word in 3 years. Ethan Cole stood near the front of the room, trembling so hard his hands looked like they might break apart. His oversized gray hoodie hung from his thin frame, and his eyes stayed fixed on the floor as cruel laughter echoed around him. "Say it louder, mute boy!" A crumpled paper ball hit his shoulder. Another student snickered. "Maybe he forgot how to talk." Mrs. Ramirez immediately stepped in. "Enough!" The room settled, but the damage had already been done. Ethan slowly returned to his desk in the back corner, shoulders curled inward like he wanted to disappear. Everyone at Lincoln Middle School knew Ethan. The silent kid, the weird one, the boy whose mother died when he was 8. After that, something inside him had shut down. He stopped raising his hand, stopped answering questions. Eventually, he stopped speaking almost entirely. Doctors called it trauma-induced selective mutism. Kids called it creepy. At first, teachers tried helping him. Counselors held sessions. Students attempted conversations. But after years of silence, people stopped trying. All except Mrs. Ramirez. Every morning, she greeted Ethan with the same warm smile. "Good morning, Ethan. I'm glad you're here." And every morning, Ethan gave the same tiny nod. That was enough for her. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Ramirez assigned a class project called "The Person Who Changed My Life." Students groaned immediately. Can it be an athlete? What about celebrities? Do they have to be alive? Mrs. Ramirez laughed softly. "Anyone who changed your heart counts." The class began writing, except Ethan. He stared blankly at the paper while thunder rumbled outside the windows. Mrs. Ramirez quietly walked over and knelt beside him. "You don't have to write much," she whispered gently. "Just the truth." Ethan's fingers tightened around his pencil. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he began to write. The next day, presentation time arrived. One by one, students stood at the front of the room reading stories about parents, basketball coaches, older siblings, and famous musicians. Some presentations were funny, some were sweet, none were memorable. Then Mrs. Ramirez looked toward the back of the room. "Ethan," she said softly, "would you like me to read yours for you?" The room immediately grew tense. Several students exchanged glances. One boy muttered, "He actually wrote something?" Ethan slowly stood up. Mrs. Ramirez looked surprised. "So, you'd like to read it yourself?" The entire classroom turned. Ethan's face had gone pale. His breathing was shaky. For a second, it looked like he might sit back down. But then he walked to the front of the class holding a single folded piece of paper. Nobody laughed now. Because something about him felt different, like every step cost him everything. He unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The room waited. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A few students looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Ramirez gave him a reassuring nod. "You can take your time." Ethan swallowed hard. "Take her time" was my mom. The room went completely still. It was the first full sentence most of them had ever heard him say. Even the kids who bullied him leaned forward in shock. Ethan continued carefully, each word fragile and uneven. "She used to sing when she cooked dinner, even when we didn't have much food." A small smile touched his face for the first time. "She said music makes empty rooms feel full." Mrs. Ramirez quietly covered her mouth. Ethan looked down at the paper again. "When she got sick, she told me something before she died." His voice cracked. Several students shifted awkwardly. Nobody expected this. Nobody knew what to do with this kind of pain. Ethan's hand shook harder now. "I didn't talk after she left because I thought if I stayed quiet," he paused, "maybe the world would stay quiet too." A girl in the front row wiped her eyes. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Ethan stared at the final line on his paper for a long moment. Then he whispered the sentence that changed everything. "My mom's last words were, 'Please don't let your sadness make you forget how loved you are.'" Silence swallowed the room whole. Not ordinary silence, the kind that hurts, the kind that forces people to feel something deeper than themselves. A boy who had mocked Ethan for years suddenly looked down at his desk in shame. Another student quietly began crying. Mrs. Ramirez pressed a trembling hand against her chest. Ethan folded the paper quickly, as if embarrassed he had said too much. But before he could return to his seat, someone started clapping. It was a girl named Lily from the second row. Then another student joined. And another. Within seconds, the entire classroom stood in applause. Not fake applause, not polite applause. The kind people give when their hearts have been broken open. Ethan froze. He looked stunned, like he genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would clap for him. Then something unexpected happened. The boy who bullied him most, Jason Turner, slowly stood up. Jason was the loudest kid in school, the type who joked through everything. But now his eyes were red. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The room fell silent again. Jason looked directly at Ethan. "I didn't know." Ethan blinked. Nobody had ever apologized to him before, not sincerely. Jason cleared his throat awkwardly. "My little brother stopped talking after my parents divorced for a while. I should have understood." The room changed in that moment. Walls came down. Masks slipped off. One student admitted her father was deployed overseas. Another confessed his mother worked 3 jobs and barely slept. A girl in the back shared that she ate lunch in the bathroom because she had no friends. For the first time all year, nobody laughed at anyone. Mrs. Ramirez looked around the room with tears in her eyes. This wasn't a classroom anymore. It was something human, something real. By the end of the day, students who had ignored Ethan for years stopped beside his desk to talk to him, not because they pitied him, because they saw him. And over the next few months, something incredible happened. Ethan started speaking more, little by little, sentence by sentence. He joined group discussions. He laughed occasionally. Once, Mrs. Ramirez even heard him humming quietly during art class, the same songs his mother used to sing. Near the end of the school year, Mrs. Ramirez found a folded note on her desk after class. It was from Ethan, written carefully in pencil. "Thank you for waiting for my voice." Mrs. Ramirez cried the entire drive home. Because sometimes the loudest people aren't the ones with the most important things to say. Sometimes the quietest hearts carry the deepest truths. And sometimes all it takes is one sentence to remind an entire room how powerful kindness can be.